and welcome to Dragons, Gazelles, and Unicorns. I'm Rosemary Truman, founder and CEO of the Center for Advanced Innovation, and I'm here today with Jordan Carlisle, the very, very talented Jordan Carlisle, which has done quite a lot of impact in his past. And so we're going to get some really extraordinarily valuable insights from him today. So Jordan, thank you so much for coming onto the show. I'm really thrilled to have you. Could you please provide like an overview of your journey and where you've been and how you got there?
Sure. I'll try to give you the highlights. So most of my career, I have either been in the role of building entrepreneurial community or starting my own companies. And all of that kind of started when I was at University of Missouri. I was studying international business, and I was exploring what I wanted to do with my career. And I had this vision for leading companies, potentially owning them. I didn't really know what entrepreneurship was, but I'd seen family members run small businesses before. And so there was intrigue there, but there was a lack of belief that I could actually do that someday. And there was also a lack of exposure. And I was blessed that one of my best friends, Max Farrell, who is now the founder of a tech startup called Workhound, tricked me into going to a competition one weekend, my senior year of college, called Startup Weekend. And the way he pitched it to me was that I was going to go to this conference where I would get to meet people from Amazon and Microsoft and Google and network with them to potentially get a job. And so I go to this event with him. He was at Grinnell College and I was at Mizzou. We met in Kansas City. I show up, I'm checking in, and the first thing the person asks me when I'm checking in is, "What idea are you going to pitch?" And I'm like, "What the hell?" And so long story short, that was my first experience being thrown into kind of a simulation of what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And in that experience, what I realized was that the things that I was learning in business school, they were great, but there was this gap between my ability to understand what I was learning and how to actually implement it. And throughout that weekend, what I realized is that most of what goes into early stages of a startup is figuring it out as you go. Mm-hmm. It's coming across a problem, looking for what are options or ways that I can solve this problem, and then getting feedback and just building constantly. And the thing that probably impacted me the most in that experience was that I got to join a team with a very veteran entrepreneur who had started successful businesses. And the way he treated me that weekend was as an equal.
Wow.
And so I left that weekend really thinking differently about what I could potentially do. And then I finished up college, moved back to Arkansas, and I had this really strong desire to want to start something. So I was going to startup weekends that were not in Arkansas. They were in other states. So anytime I found one on startupweekend.org's calendar, I would sign up and go participate. Mm-hmm. But when I moved back, there was this void. And so I got a job at Walmart. I was doing that 9 to 5. But then my best friend and I decided, why don't we start hosting startup weekends in Arkansas? Since we had this incredible experience, we learned a lot. We brought all these amazing people together, it gets all these people together. Why not do it there? So we spent our nights and weekends and lunch breaks pulling together plans. We would raise about 20 grand per event. And then we'd market the crap out of it, just guerrilla marketing. And our first few events went really well. So this was like in 2013 and 14. Mm-hmm. And we were just these kids. We had no idea what economic development was. We really didn't know what startup community meant. We just knew that we were young and wanted to like learn things. So we launched these events, and all of a sudden we got a lot of attention because some of the companies that got started at the events got traction afterwards. Some of them went on to raise money. And in some cases, some of these companies are still around. And for example, one company, didn't start the actual idea at Startup Weekend, but a lot of the early stage or the early people on the team pivoted into another idea that now employs like 250 people in Central Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden we got a lot of attention from economic developers who were like, hey, we're using state funding to launch these programs to help catalyze business growth in the state. How did you do this? Like, how much do you get paid? Like, what are you doing? And we were like, we're volunteers. We raised this money on our own. And we did this because we think it's fun.
Yeah. Oh, great.
And so that kind of launched, that's 2013, 2014. I ended up leaving Walmart. And then, I'll give the fast track version now. So that was kind of like launching point into startup community building. That led to a job at the Little Rock Chamber of Commerce, where I co-founded the Venture Center with Lee Watson and Mike Steely and James Hendren and a whole cast of supporters. Worked on that for about 2 years, helped build out all of the early stage programming for the pre-accelerator program, helped model the accelerator program, and then all of our community-facing programs I ran for the first 2 years of the Venture Center. And then I hit a point where I talked to mentors, and I was like, I got into this game because I wanted to learn how to start a company. Mm-hmm. I feel like we're doing a great job of impacting the community, but I want to do more. What can I do? And he just boldly said, you need to go start a company. And I think at the time, that's not always the best advice for people. But I think at the time I was in a position where I wasn't married, didn't have kids, didn't have a lot of financial overhead. And at that, I could have gone to grad school or I could have started a startup. And so to me, the value of going and actually practicing starting a company was going to be way more valuable than going to grad school. And so in 2015, I started a software company called Strengthen. We built software for health coaches to run.
I love that. I love like a company. We have to talk more about that.
Yeah. So we started Strengthen and did that for about 2.5 years. Had some, trial and error along the way, learned a lot, tried to raise money, totally bootstrapped it. And eventually before we raised money, decided not to, and kind of kept it as a lifestyle business. While I was in the middle of kind of thinking about more ideas to launch, since we had this platform of a small business to kind of give ourselves a strong footing from, the Bentonville Chamber of Commerce reached out to me. Graham Cobb, the CEO, and I had worked together in Little Rock. And he said, hey, Bentonville, Arkansas is doing some really interesting things and looking at entrepreneurship as a centerpiece for how to build a 21st century economy. Would you be interested in coming up? And at first I said no, because when I was at Walmart, I didn't really get a organic pull to like go and do startup activity from Bentonville. So I didn't really realize there was much there. Long story short, came up and visited. So much had changed in a matter of 5 years. And I really could tell, and I give this analogy, and we'll probably get into this later, but Bentonville is like a rocket ship. And when you're an early stage startup investor, you want to look at opportunities where you're getting them before they hit the inflection point and they take off. And if you're in Bentonville, it feels like it's taken off. But if you take a step back and you realize just how many people don't realize how awesome Bentonville is, and how much is in the pipeline for building Bentonville, it's very obvious that this place is going to take off in an extreme way. And so that was what hooked me. I did the Bentonville Chamber thing for about 2 years, helped run the state's largest tech conference, the Northwest Arkansas Tech Summit. That was definitely a team effort, but had a heavy influence on that program. And then also helped launch a program for entrepreneurs of color called Venture Noir with my good friend Bjorn Simmons, which is still going on today. And then as of April, I left the chamber to join the Whole Health Institute, which is a new startup that is backed by Alice Walton as the head of technology. So for me, it was like the perfect opportunity of kind of the health coaching software stuff that we built, Strengthen, community building, and ultimately building Bentonville. And so, it was a lifetime opportunity for me. And
absolutely.
That's what I'm doing. So that's
working with Alice Walton. That's awesome. And congratulations, by the way. You deserve it. Yeah. What a fabulous journey. I have so many questions for you. But by the way, if you ever need an idea, if you ever need one, we have like 170,000 in our database. You get to pick out whatever the topic is, and we'll give you some inventions.
I love working on side projects and experimenting with things. So I'm going to take you up on that.
Excellent. Well, I just wrote down so it was really interesting that you had have you heard of imposter syndrome?
Yes.
So you had that in college because you said that you weren't sure you could do something. And I was like, well, of course I could have seen it from a mile away. You could definitely do anything. But there are so many different questions I have for you. By the way, on the startup that you launched, we launched a startup during the pandemic called Soma. And it's in stealth mode. You would like it a lot. So maybe you should be advising on that. So you are leading into one of the questions I have, which is you've played an enormous role in galvanizing the community. What are you have actually yourself have driven a lot of the rocket ship for Northwest Arkansas. I'd like to know what your secrets are. What are the things you did to really help make it thrive even more? Because you said it was thriving even more after 5 years. You went there, but now you actually have been a pillar to make it grow even more.
Yeah, I love this question, and you use the word secrets, and I would, and this is why I like this question, because I think the reality is that it's hard truths.
Right.
I don't think it's any secret. It may be the secrets may be blurred within a sea of noise, but I think what really takes to build a strong startup community isn't complicated. It's really hard. So Startup Weekend, going back to that, is a program that was supported by really influential startup community builders from across the country. One of those being Brad Feld, who is known for really being a centerpiece in the Boulder, Colorado startup community. And so I got to engage with him a little bit as being one of the head organizers in the country, and really followed him and learned deeply about what they did right in Boulder. And he has his Boulder thesis, which has 4 core components. And I'm a big believer in that those actually do work. And I can touch a little bit on why I believe those work. That may be my own nuanced experiences. So number 1 is the community has to be founder-led. Number 2 is that it needs to be inclusive. Number 3 is that there has to be a long-term commitment by the people who are building the community. And that's not just the entrepreneurs. You also have investors, you have universities, you have government, you have other supporting small businesses. And then you also have to have meaningful community engagement. So that's things like the Scale Challenge and other programs that the Center for Advancing Innovations does. And I think those things really do work. And the hard part about it is that when a community that is not on the coast wants to build off that model, there's a disconnect when a community invests resources into a program and then expects it to just work right away.
Yeah, right.
And I first learned this through the Venture Center because, at that point in time, this was 2014 and 15, and going into 16, we were still trying to explain what a startup was and that tech companies could be built outside of Silicon Valley. So like right off the bat, we were struggling with getting long-term commitment from community because there was a lack of belief that it could even happen. And so at that time, we knew that underlying principles of economic development is that, small businesses and startups are actually the lifeblood of any community in the long run, because they're making most of the jobs, they're driving most of the growth. And they also create this innovation flywheel where it comes up with new ideas that sustains it in the long run.
I'm totally taking that, the innovation flywheel.
Yeah. And so, so I think right off the bat, that was something we noticed. And then if there is not a startup community to begin with, you have a really hard chicken and the egg problem. And it's actually, I don't know how to describe this in a biological analogy, but you don't have the entrepreneurs necessarily that are, in Arkansas in particular, like you may have old, like kind of more traditional businesses. And like, for example, we have Walmart, which is, it's definitely a technology company, but it's known for brick and mortar retail.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an older company if you're looking at kind of the internet age. And so if you don't have like entrepreneurs who have recently had success in this internet paradigm, you probably also don't have venture capitalists who are in the area that understand how to invest in those types of ideas, or that are even interested in those types of ideas. And so then what happens is government says, okay, well, we need to create that. Or like other supporting cast says we need to create that. And then they take the leadership role, which means that it's not being led by entrepreneurs. And so there becomes this disconnect between what actually matters to an entrepreneur and kind of what happens when you're trying to like justify the case for like investing resources in economic development. And so sometimes programs could like start and it's like they're not entirely sure if they actually are helping entrepreneurs or not. But it's more of like, hey, we're doing this and we're creating this marketing campaign. And what's interesting is like that initial buzz you're creating, even though it may not be the most effective at actually pushing an entrepreneur forward, is still important because it is signaling to the rest of the world that, hey, we want to be a place where entrepreneurs come and build. But until you get over that initial
inertia,
that feeling from Peter Thiel's language, like the 0 to 1, it's really tough because if for example, and I experienced this with my startup company, it was I needed entrepreneurs who had actually started a software as a service business and not a real estate business, helping me understand how to go to market and how to think about the unit economics of my business and how to think about hiring. And it was really hard to translate, other business experiences to that. So all in all, like the secret question is that you got to just go do it. And I think for me, what I always practiced was like, I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I had started some side projects and was doing the startup weekends. And so for me, I was like, I'm going to lead the startup weekend effort as like thinking about it from like an entrepreneur's perspective. And I'm not going to wait for government to tell me that I can do it. I'm not going to necessarily like play the politics game. I'm just going to go pretend like I'm running a company and going and creating value. And when that happens, what you do is you signal to other people who want to help that also think entrepreneurially, that they don't have to wait for somebody to give them permission to go and create something in the community. And so then this amazing organic community building happens where people who aren't necessarily plugged into the whole traditional economic development world start doing things that are providing value to startups. And then you're more likely to see entrepreneurs who have had success step up and say, all right, I want to give back and help too. I might run my own thing or create my own initiative. And that's way more sustainable than saying we need, a commitment from, or not necessarily saying we need a commitment, but like saying we're going to rely on some commitment from a source indefinitely to make this happen. So yeah, and I think the inclusive part plays a huge role in that as well. And I think by going out and just doing things and showing like, hey, you don't have to have permission is actually a really strong signal for inclusivity. But I think it's also important to realize if you are in a situation where you're building community, that if somebody is interested in starting something in your community to help entrepreneurs, don't think of them as a threat to what you're doing. You've got to be inclusive and say, hey, how can I help you?
Yeah,
and
right.
How can this be a part of the community and work alongside what we're doing? And it sounds simple, but if I were to say that if there was one thing that has distinguished me from other people, and I'm not saying that there's not anyone else who's doing this. And I think Arkansas is a great place because we are super collaborative and we have many people who are thinking this way. But I think the thing that I've always tried to commit to the most is if anyone wants to do anything to help our community, I'm going to make sure and be open arms to helping them. And sometimes people get caught up in like, I want to make sure my program is successful, and I'm going to compete for, maybe a grant that someone else is going to apply for, in starting a program. And I just think that if you think that way, you're just slowing yourself down, and you're better off just unconditionally supporting other people who want to help. And you're going to end up going a lot further if you do that.
Yeah. Well, Jordan, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done during the Scale Challenge. You've been extraordinarily helpful. Can't even begin to describe it. One thing that always amazes me when I hear you speak, and I don't think I really have ever heard anyone else speak like you do so eloquently about community. Because that really illustrates your ability, as I mentioned before, galvanizing all the different components and putting them together and being very collaborative. How do you describe community?
It's a really interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about it from its anatomical components, so like ultimately it boils down to, how do individuals find meaning and like purpose within a bigger ecosystem or a bigger environment. And so ultimately it starts with, how do individuals identify with a community or a group of people? And then I think that extends into, how do you have relationships with people that are in your community? And so, and going back to the whole startup community building kind of pillars, is like, the reason why they're so effective is that if you can truly lead that way, for example, having somebody who has experienced the ups and downs, the waking up at 3 a.m. because your credit cards are maxed out, you're thinking about, how am I going to get my next sale, or even your first sale as a company. Everybody feels like you're crazy, at least at one point. You're going out and starting this company, and there's all these pressures that are going against you. And so those experiences are really hard to just imagine and really feel for somebody else. And so when I think about community, like making sure that you prioritize giving a voice for entrepreneurs, it's because the way that community becomes meaningful for other entrepreneurs is by being able to relate to those experiences, whether they were really good or really bad. And so to me, like, community, I think a lot of people think of community as like fluffy, like feel good kind of thing. But community also is like, it's health, like it's your well-being. Like if you don't have people that are around you and supporting you through your journey, you won't make it. Like, we're not made to go through experiences in life alone. And yeah, so I think, to me, that's what it means to me and why it's so important. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of my sufficient answer.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things that you mentioned was that I'd put a fine point on, is that, you're aware of others' needs and you're there to help. Right? And having that feeling is invaluable. So having a community is invaluable. And like I said, you're one of the few people I've ever heard say it so much, and because they say some completely other words. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I really think is foundational is the inclusion. So, I'm in Bethesda, you're in Northwest Arkansas. Our programs, we did the Scale program all around the world, essentially. And we have, new startups coming into your neighborhood from all around the world, which I'm really excited about. But everyone in the community has been very open welcoming these startups with open arms. So your inclusion theme has come through very, very well with our program. What's also interesting is when we do these challenges, since they're virtual in nature, we get to include a lot of women and minorities that don't normally get included because of the barriers to entry, and also different groups of people that are in underserved areas where there is no possibility of being an entrepreneur. So 46% of our the people who come into our challenges are from those areas. And we end up with 60% of our companies co-founded by women and 80% co-founded by minorities. So it's we totally buck the national average. Another thing I really relate to is your point on the lack of belief. So when I started these challenges 5 years ago, I was told by so many people, Rosemary, it's impossible. There's no way you're going to pull it off. It's like not going to happen. But of course, it just takes time and effort, right? So, you were talking about the hard truths. If you were to narrow down the number one hard truth that you learned, what was it?
That most people won't truly believe that what your vision is for your idea, your program, whatever it might be, can actually work until after it works.
Yeah, that's true.
And that doesn't mean that people won't support you, but I think, and I think a good way of putting this from somebody who's familiar with startups is product market fit. So it's the question of if you don't have an overwhelming pull for whatever you're doing to the point where you can't handle the amount of attention and things that are going on for what you're doing, you probably don't have product market fit. And what that really means is that, like, until you reach that inflection point where you've started getting traction and you're successful, you're not going to have a bunch of people, even your friends and family, like going out of their way to talk about what you're doing and share it with everybody. You may have a few, and those people are your early adopters, and they're fantastic, but most people will not. And then it's always interesting, because then once you do get traction and things are successful, you'll have people that will go back and say, oh yeah, I helped you out early, or I was a part of this from the get-go. And
right.
And that's fine. And people, I think, do find ways to help, even though they may not be the overwhelming champions of what you're doing. But I would say that that's the hardest part, because it's really hard to manage your psyche when you're going through that. Being told no is something we're not built for. And I think that's why having going and having entrepreneurial experiences is so invaluable, is that you become better at tolerating no. It still never gets better. Like, it still never really feels okay, but you learn how to manage it and deal with it. And so I think that's the hardest part, is knowing that you have to overcome that hump before everything starts getting easier.
Yeah. So Jordan, I got told no. So I started my career at Goldman Sachs in investment banking, and they rejected me 145 times. Wow. Until they said no, 145 times, until I wrote a proposal, because they didn't hire non-MBAs at the time, but I really wanted to work for Goldman Sachs. So they, so I wrote this proposal. So finally I got around the recruiting people, and they sent it directly to the listed stock block desk, where I'd actually be making the impact.
Yeah.
And they read it, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is, I made up this straight through processing technology platform idea. And I didn't know if it was going to work or not, but anyway, I told them that it was going to save them $40 million a year, and they only had to pay me 1%. So they only paid me $400,000 a year. And then they hired me for $42,000 with a big sign-on bonus. I said, well, man, they don't they know numbers? This is zero, But this is 28 years ago. So anyway, yes, no is not easy. The question is, how do you get around the nose? So, Man, tremendous insights, by the way, Jordan. I'm really grateful for those. So, during this pandemic, how has it affected Northwest Arkansas, the entrepreneurial community?
So it's interesting question for me because I started transitioning to my new role at the Whole Health Institute about 2 weeks into most of the state being under a shelter-in-place advisory. So I haven't been as connected into everything that has gone on in the startup community since then. But leading into it, and for the first few weeks of shelter in place, when there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty, I was a part of a pretty high frequency cadence of emergency action to help entrepreneurs in the region. And I think this story is really cool because this actually is a fantastic example of this place being a unique place for entrepreneurial support. So we have this group called the Entrepreneurial Support Organization call. That's a monthly call for all of the ESOs, entrepreneurial support organizations in the state of Arkansas. And it's not a mandatory call, but the participation rate's extremely high. And it had been going on for about 2.5 years or so. And mostly due to the effort of Sarah Goforth at the University of Arkansas. Sarah's wonderful.
Yes, she is.
I tell her all the time that I think this call is actually one of the most important things that happens in the startup community, because it goes back to some of these principles of like what you do to build a startup community, being inclusive, and having meaningful programming. And so these support organizations, have this open call for any organization that wants to create a startup program or launch a startup program. And in the conversations, it truly is like, who's got a program that we can help support? And there's 50 people on the call, or typically not 50, but sometimes up to 50. And everybody's there to listen and learn how they can help. And if we hadn't have had that infrastructure and that regular cadence and commitment of doing that call and it being a meaningful way to actually collaborate, leading into the COVID crisis, we would have been slower to respond to get out and help people in the community. So because we had that call, we had our regular call, organizer call scheduled probably a week and a half before our shelter-in-place policy started going into effect. And so after that call, we actually suggested, like, should we start doing more calls to see if there's potential ways we can help businesses if we start having lockdowns. Mm-hmm. And so as things started escalating day to day, and I mean, everybody knows this because most people, if you're employed or were at work or whatever, like, that it happened drastically. Like,
yeah, right.
You were at work one day, everybody was unsure what was going to happen. There was some doubt that you would have to work remotely. And then, like, there was a day where you probably came in and your boss said, everybody go home. And so, like, we were ahead of the curve, and were able to start these conversations to build out infrastructure with the Small Business Association, the Arkansas Small Business and Technology Center, Startup Junkie, Endeavor for Entrepreneurs, the Venture Center in Little Rock, Scale Challenge, and then so many others across the state, legislators, the Northwest Arkansas Council, so many people that all made time on almost a daily basis when we first started it to get on a call and say, what can we do to help businesses right now? And so I think that's a really incredible example of just how having that inclusive environment and being willing to collaborate and having meaningful programs to engage around is so important, because all of these people had had some type of working relationship in some capacity. So it was like we didn't skip a beat, and all of a sudden we just started trying to figure out whatever we could do to help people. And, you know, huge shout out to like organizations like Startup Junkie. I mean, they would update their website with a blog post on new information literally like minutes after it was released on how to get access to the relief funding. So, you know, that's kind of my last meaningful experience. And then I would say since then, you know, I think things are definitely hard. I don't think anyone has it easy at all. And I think that, but I do think that things have maintained momentum. And I think in some pockets of Northwest Arkansas, it's almost incredible to see just how many small businesses have really weathered the storm well. And I think that it has a lot to do with just the overwhelming generosity and support and understanding of how important it is to keep our economy going. Yeah, so I think that's kind of what I'm seeing. But I think that, you know, as most people know who are in this game, the second order and third order effects of all this stuff are yet to be seen. And I think it's going to be, you know, a year, 18 months before we really get a grasp of what all of this is going to mean for us. But it's good to know that we have so many fantastic organizations that are in the trenches really wanting to help.
That's fantastic. That's amazing. Great story, Jordan. I get goosebumps. Wow. That's wonderful. I mean, many are hurting a lot where we are as well. So, and I don't, that call that you just mentioned, it's not, we don't have that kind of connection where I am. So now obviously you have all these wonderful things that are going into Northwest Arkansas that are known. So tell us about the future of Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah, I'll tell you about the future that I can tell you.
Yes.
I don't know that many secrets. I think you know, what's interesting is like there's not a lot of secrets per se on what's going on here. I think the interesting thing is that there's so much going on that sometimes it's hard to believe. Like it's hard to believe just how much is being developed here. And it doesn't really hit you unless you come and visit and you like drive around and you're like, so when they were saying this is what you actually meant. Like around seeing it and like, wow. You know, so I think the biggest thing to anchor things around is the Walmart home office is going to be the largest economic development project that the state of Arkansas has ever seen. You know, obviously being Fortune #1, you know, world's largest company, depending on how you slice it, and the largest retailer in the world, that project will have a drastic effect on the community here. And I think, you know, for those of you who aren't familiar with Bentonville or have never been here, Walmart's presence here is huge already. And it's not like they're building something new where they're bringing new people in to employ more people, but it's the brand and the image that they're kind of re-envisioning for our community by building this you know, next generation type home facility is going to set a tone for the rest of the community. So I tell this really interesting story. This is my favorite story to tell about why Bentonville and why now. So if you understand anything about Bentonville, you know that Sam Walton's, the Walton family's successes building Walmart have really driven this whole region's growth. So all of Northwest Arkansas has really grown because of that. You have other companies that have grown alongside of that, like Tyson Foods and JB Hunt and several others. But you know, there's obviously a pull because Walmart's growth. And the philosophy and ethos of Walmart since inception has always been everyday low cost. And that philosophy, if you've ever worked at Walmart or dealt with anyone at Walmart, is absolutely authentic. They do everything they can to drive prices down so that they can pass that value on to consumers. And that's why Walmart has been so successful. And that vision and that philosophy was set by Sam Walton. And he relentlessly built a culture around that. And I think that enabled him to build an amazing team and scale up what Walmart was. And so it's still such an important core value, and it will never go away. But the way that you reach everyday low prices today is drastically different than what it looked like when he first started this company. So when Walmart, in its first, 40 years of existence, when you would come to Bentonville to do business with Walmart, everyone at Walmart made sure that when you drove to the building, you understood that this was a Spartan town, and they were not going to budge on dollars, because you looked around and it did not look like they were spending a bunch of money. And obviously there were nice things in the community, and there were really great things, but I think overall the values of Walmart being kind of this low cost driver trickled down throughout the entire Bentonville community, and you could see it manifested in just the way the community looked. And so now, if you think about how do you get to driving costs down, it has almost everything to do with the type of engineering talent that you can attract to build the systems to get to the scale to drive economies of scale. And so in a world where Walmart is, this Goliath fighting, depending on which front you're thinking about, whether it's online or whether it's brick and mortar, Walmart's the Goliath in the brick and mortar, and Amazon's the Goliath in e-commerce, but they're trading blows back and forth. And really the way that both of them are going to be able to compete with each other in the long run is what type of talent they can attract. So, the ethos that Sam Walton set has not changed, but the way that you get there it looks different. And so the home office is going to look a lot more like what a Facebook would build for their campus than it would what Walmart did initially, 50, 60 years ago. And so that's going to make this town look drastically different. And I think everything that has gone on in the entrepreneurial community world is in alignment with that, because the community values innovation and excellence in business. And so we also went from having only a few entrepreneurial support organizations to having dozens. And I think we will see, we're laying the seeds and fertilizer for major growth. I think there will be major breakout companies that happen, and we don't know what those are today, but I think we will start to see some that really grow. And then I think outside of business, you have amazing things that the Walton family and other namesake families in Northwest Arkansas are doing to build a robust quality of life here. So if you're not familiar with Bentonville, Crystal Bridges Museum is absolutely incredible.
Yes, it's
newly launched sister museum, the Momentary, is incredible. The Walton Arts Center in Fayetteville, and a number of all the outdoor activities were increasingly becoming one of the best mountain biking destinations in the world. The culinary scene is exploding. Just this rich, dynamic kind of all these emergent properties that are coming together to really make this an amazing place to live. And so all that being said, that was long-winded, and you started getting my excitement up because I love it. But all that being said, it's one thing for me to tell you all these things. It's a whole nother thing to come and see it, because there's not a town that is of this size. It's only 55,000 people-ish. And some of the things that you can find here are things that you wouldn't expect to even find in bigger metro areas.
The museums are amazing. The trails are amazing. I've been looking at real estate.
I don't think you can go wrong at this point.
No. It's fantastic. It really is. Northwest Arkansas special. So switching gears quickly. So you're an angel investor as well. So what do you look for in your angel investments?
Yeah. So let me qualify this. I am a broke angel, and a noob angel. So I am most of my startup community career or building career, I've been an unaccredited investor. And so, one thing I'm very passionate about is actually reform around investor accreditation laws, because there have been a number of companies that I have seen grow and been been a part of helping affect their journey some way, shape, or form that I wasn't necessarily able to participate in any type of financial investment into the company because I wasn't accredited. But I have taken advisory roles where I was able to get equity into companies. And so for me, my strategy around angel investing is investing time and network and energy. And then recently, I've started doing more financial investments into startup companies. And the way that I'm approaching this right now is learning as much as I possibly can. So I by no means have I gotten to a point where I can take significant financial risk and, probably participate in funding rounds that you would expect a normal angel to be able to participate in. But through platforms like Republic and Seed Invest and WeFunder and a few others, I'm able to participate in syndicated rounds, and that allows me to learn a lot alongside experienced investors. So my approach to that is very rigorous. So I know that I ultimately will do this for the rest of my life. And the amount of money that I'm going to potentially make off any deals that I'm getting in now is not going to be that significant, because the amount that I'm putting in is just not enough to give me an outsized return. But my ability to now go and see, here's what a deal structure looks like. Here is what an early stage team is doing. And here are what updates look like. Here is what investor relations look like. And then also building a kind of pattern recognition for when I do see exits start to happen. Now I can understand, based on deal memos that I've written along the way, about here's why I'm actually investing in this company, and learning based on what I thought in that time, was I right or wrong? So what I've learned today is mostly from my experience community building, where I didn't have skin in the game. And so I would discount most of that learning, because I think that it's really important to actually have skin in the game.
Right.
It's really easy to pick winners from the sidelines. And so to me, like, getting in the game is probably the most important thing for me at this point. But then I would say that I have learned a lot from trying to find exceptional resources of insight. So I religiously watch the investor blogs and angel investor courses that Y Combinator puts out, as well as going through their startup school stuff. Like, anytime they have any of those courses, I devour them, take notes, watch them a few times. And then, one interesting thing too is building, I think part of my pattern matching strategy is also watching for how really great founders identify other really great founders. And the way that I've done that is, several years ago, I went through and I scrubbed all of my Twitter, and I unfollowed pretty much everyone. I said, like, I don't care. I don't give a shit about any of this stuff. I'm just going to unfollow all of it. And then I went through and I said, all right, I'm going to start with a very short list of the best, most exceptional entrepreneurs and investors in the world. I'm going to follow them, and I'm just going to watch their conversations. And then through those conversations, I've seen them, identify or converse with other talented people. I've seen them announce that they just invested in a company. I've seen them you know, talk up other people and like commend other people for things that they're doing. And then this interesting phenomenon that's happened, I think, over the past like year or two is like tweet storm essays. So I think some of the best general partners and funds right now are ones that are actively like sharing all their thoughts and ideas through blogs or Twitter or whatever. And there's a few. One of them is Eric Tornberg from Village Global. And I've just, it's been fascinating because he has this strategy for testing ideas where he will write really strong opinionated essays, but do it in tweet form. And a lot of it he's not an expert on, but it's like topics that he's interested in. And so he'll write these essays in a tweet form just so he can see if experts will come out and start correcting him. Or
that's great.
So instead of him trying to wonder, like, is this the best source or not, or whatever, you know, he's got 30,000 or 40,000 followers. He throws it out there, and then all of a sudden he's got all this research for himself on a specific topic. So anyway, I think that's a part of my angel investment strategy, because when I see somebody who's able to think like that or problem solve openly like that, to me, that's a really strong signal that they're somebody that I would want to invest in. So I follow those people very closely. Anytime someone like that has an opportunity for me to invest in, I do anything I can to try to get into it.
Excellent. So that's a note for everybody on the call today. Go look at who Jordan is following. Yeah, and Jordan, send me the link for that gentleman, Eric.
Okay, sure. I'll do.
So, man, this has been extremely valuable, Jordan. Incredibly valuable. Is there one last piece of insight you'd like to leave the audience with today?
Yeah, I think so. I'll impart some influence from what I'm doing now with the Whole Health Institute. And something that I'm very passionate about is helping people live their most fulfilling lives. And I believe entrepreneurship is a core part of that, because when we use our skills and abilities and we work on challenging things, it provides very meaningful experiences. And so entrepreneurship is, to me, one of the best ways to manifest that. And you know, when you're doing things like that, when you're building things and it is actually creating value for someone else, I think it does that even more so. So when you're an entrepreneur, there are times where I think you're going to be challenged, and you're going to neglect your health and well-being. And I think that it's really hard to actually be a successful entrepreneur and not neglect your health and well-being in some times. But I think my challenge to founders now is build a culture that values health and well-being at the very beginning. So take moments to be mindful, take moments to pause and really reflect on the things that you're doing, and be aware of what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. And don't be afraid to slow down and give yourself time to be healthy. You know, if I were to give my quick pitch on things to do that you should not feel ashamed for, is go to bed early. Get a good night's sleep.
Yes.
Put exercise on your calendar. Don't treat it like an optional thing. Treat it like any other meeting. Try to eat healthy, and take moments to just disconnect. And I promise, from my own experiences, I've noticed extreme growth when I've done that. And I think if we can all do that and put more intention around that, we'll end up creating a better world for it.
I agree. Jordan, that was amazing. Fabulous.
Thank you for having me.
Fist bump. Oh, you're amazing. And I would say exactly the same thing. when someone wants to bump my exercise routine, that's on the calendar. That's mandatory.
Yeah,
Thank you so much again. This has been
thank you. It's been
extremely valuable. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.